Hi everyone. Welcome back to Julia's story. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. By 6, the marble floors were cold enough to wake my bones. I carried a bucket that smelled like lemon and rain, and I moved the way quiet people move when the house is not theirs. The chandeliers above me were still sleeping, little stars trapped in crystal. My hands were cracked from soap, but warm from the water. When I breathed out, I could taste mint from the tea I always finished in a hurry, because time here wore shoes with sharp heels. I was the maid with a small room near the service stairs. The girl who folded napkins like prayers and ironed shirts that would touch meetings I would never see. Most mornings I felt like a note someone tucked under a heavy book and forgot to read. Still I hummed, soft and off-key, because humming is how I keep my chest from rusting. He found me by the terrace doors, the millionaire's son, Adrian, hair damp from a run, a white towel around his neck like a surrender flag that had learned to breathe. I never planned to learn his smile, but kindness is loud, even when whispered. The night security guard had dozed by the lobby camera, and I left a cup of soup by his elbow with a note. The guard woke, blinked, and said my name the way a person says thank you when they do not have money to buy more words. Adrian had seen it. He leaned a shoulder to the doorframe and watched me rinse the mop and squeeze it clean. I could feel the weight of his gaze in the back of my ribs, a polite weight, like a hand offering balance when a boat rocks. "You look tired," he said, and somehow it did not feel like an insult. It felt like someone noticed the hours stitched under my eyes. "Tired is clean," I answered. "Tired means I did not quit." He laughed, low and real, and it slid into the morning air. He asked my name, and when I told him, he repeated it softly, as if checking the spelling on his heart. "Ronnie," he said, like it had a center and a roof. The house filled with footsteps as the day stretched. His mother's perfume drifted through the hall, white flowers and iron. His father's voice arrived like weather behind a closed door. The other staff moved faster, their faces thinning into yes. I kept wiping sunlight from the glass because sometimes the only miracle I can afford is a clean window. After breakfast service, a small moment healed me. Adrian bent to pick up a dropped spoon and handed it to me instead of leaving it for my hands. No one had ever done that in this house. The spoon was warm from his fingers. I put it in my apron pocket like a secret medal. He followed me to the back garden where the roses stood stubborn in the cool. The sky was the color of silver coins. He asked about the village my mother lives in, about the songs I used to sing at weddings when the speakers were too old to carry joy without crackling. He listened with his mouth closed, a rare skill in this neighborhood. We began to trade small kindnesses like children trading stickers. I saved him a ripe mango before the kitchen could claim it for a display no one would eat. He moved his car one morning so the gardener's truck could turn without scraping pride off its sides. The house did not crash. The world did not end. It simply felt warmer by the width of a breath. I knew the rules. Maids do not belong in stories with sons of money. But rules cannot hold a heart still when it finds a pulse it has been searching for. My nights were quieter because of him. My days, less heavy. The same marble, the same stairs, the same aching wrists, but now my name had a place to sit. By the end of that week, after a dinner where laughter sounded like glass tapped with rings, after a comment at the table that made me smaller without using a single ugly word, I went to the laundry room and let the washers thunder while I counted my breaths. Adrian came in slow, palms open, like you approach a bird that might fly. "I saw," he said. "I am sorry." The apology was not a performance. It was naked and useful. I looked at him with all my tired, all my courage, all my careful. "I want a life where kindness is not an act of rebellion," I said. "I want a door with my name on it that nobody laughs at." Then he did a reckless thing with gentle hands. He took off the ring he did not wear for fashion, small and plain, his grandmother's band, and placed it in my palm with a tremor I felt in my wrist. He spoke like a man choosing a road in the rain. Come with me, Ronnie. Not tomorrow. Today. Let us stand somewhere simple and say the words before anyone builds a fence around them. The washers spun and the room breathed hot and soapy, that honest smell of work and water. I held the band between thumb and finger, light as a coin lost under a cushion, heavy as a promise. Outside the window, the garden wind moved one fallen rose across the path like a small, stubborn boat. I tucked the ring into my pocket and wiped my hands on my apron. He reached for my coat hanging on the hook, not to dress me, but to hold it open like a better morning. We stepped into the corridor and the house somehow felt narrower. A door clicked somewhere down the hall. And when we reached the main staircase, a voice, cool and precise, found our backs. Where are you taking the maid, Adrian? Her voice did not rise. It never needed to. Mrs. Vale carried power like a winter coat, heavy and quiet. She stood at the turn of the staircase, pearls cool on her throat, a white scarf falling like a page you are not allowed to read. The house held its breath with me. Where are you taking the maid, Adrian? The word maid brushed my skin the way cold water does when you were not ready. I felt small and also stubborn, the way a candle feels when the wind leans close. Adrian did not step back. He set himself at my side so we were shoulder to shoulder, not in front and behind. His voice was steady, but I heard the hurt under it, the bruise that comes when your home refuses to recognize the new beat of your heart. I am taking Ronnie out, Mother. Out where? She asked without asking, the velvet in her tone hiding a steel hook. The staff corridor seemed to shrink. Far down the hall, a houseman stopped polishing a frame and pretended he had never learned English. I touched the rail because wood tells the truth. It remembered every hand that ever gripped it too hard. I could feel mine joining them. My ribs lifted and fell. I kept my chin level and my mouth kind. I had learned long ago that dignity is a quiet that refuses to apologize. Mrs. Vale studied my apron as if courage were a stain you could treat with club soda. I waited. Waiting is a skill maids learn without being taught. Then she turned her eyes to her son, and I watched 1,000 childhoods pass between them. The first bicycle. The late-night fever. The piano recital where she had clapped alone. She was not a monster. She was a woman who had built her life like a tower and feared any door that did not open on her schedule. Not with her, she said. Not like this. I expected Adrian to argue. He did not. He took my coat from his arm and slipped it into my hands. The gesture was simple and it felt like a vow. He spoke softly, like you do when a room is full of fragile things. I am with her. 2 words, and the world tilted by the width of a spoon. His mother did not shout. She only stepped aside the smallest amount, which in this house meant everything and also nothing. We walked past her, my pulse bright in my wrists, his breath warm at my temple. The door out to the drive opened on air that tasted like rain and engine heat. The car was not his usual knife of a car. It was the gardener's old sedan, keys borrowed with a nod. The seats smelled like sun and fertilizer, like honest things. We drove without the radio. The city moved around us, wide and distracted, as if it had better stories to follow than ours. At the registry office, fluorescent lights hummed like tired bees. A woman at the desk chewed a mint and gave us a form with boxes that wanted to know everything and nothing. My hand shook once when I wrote my mother's name. I pressed my palm flat on the paper until the tremor remembered it was allowed to stop. Adrian's fingers were sure, but when he signed next to me, I watched his knuckles pale. Even courage has blood that needs reminding. The clerk asked if we were certain, her voice routine and kind. Adrian said yes like a bell. I said yes like a breath I had been saving since childhood. We stood before a man in a suit that had been pressed with care. He read words that tasted like flour and water, plain and filling. The ring Adrian had given me warmed against my skin. When he slid it on, my name woke up in my chest and walked around. I felt tall without moving. We stepped outside into thin sun. The street stank of rain and fried onions and life that could not afford perfume. I wanted to bottle the smell and keep it in my pocket for days when the house would try to convince me I was less than what my lungs could hold. On the corner, a boy sold flowers with petals too open for their age. He tugged my sleeve and offered a daisy that had already started to brown at the edges. I bought it with my coin and tucked it behind my ear. The boy grinned with the entire lower half of his face and ran back to his crate. Small kindness is a country of its own. I live there when I can. We ate noodles from a stall, standing, steam rising into our faces. He kissed my knuckles because my hands were busy with chopsticks and sauce. It was not a movie kiss. It was a kitchen kiss. It stayed with me anyway. We returned as the sky changed its mind. Gray became purple. The house loomed the way houses do when they think they know you. The gate guard stared at the gardener's car, recognized it, and let us through with careful indifference. In the side yard, the lemon tree dropped one fruit with a soft thud like a warning. I pocketed it. I like to keep proof that sweet things can fall and still be useful. Inside, the staff hallway had grown ears. Faces brightened and then flattened when they remembered the risks of smiling. The night guard, the same man I fed, touched the brim of his cap with 2 fingers and looked at my left hand. His eyes warmed 1 degree. He went back to watching the grainy screen that never tells the truth quickly enough. We reached my small room by the service stairs. The bedspread with its faded violets waited like an old aunt who knows how to keep a secret. Adrian stood in the doorway and pressed his forehead to the frame just once, as if asking the house to behave. Then the door at the far end of the hall opened and Mr. Vale stepped in, his tie already loosened, his eyes bright with the kind of interest that never means good news. Behind him, the head of household, Mrs. Kent, clutched a folder like it contained a weather report. Mr. Vale's voice was smooth, a river before a storm. He took in my ring and smiled a smile that belonged to a boardroom. "So it is true," he said. "My son has married the maid." The folder opened with a soft snap. Mrs. Kent pulled out a letter stamped in blue. The seal was the kind that gets you to stop speaking in the middle of your own life. The first consequence arrived before the kettle could even boil. Mrs. Kent's hands shook just enough to make the blue seal quiver. I could smell office ink and something colder underneath, like a window left open in winter. She passed the page to Adrian's father. He did not read it out loud. He handed it to me the way rich men hand a bill to a waiter. Termination of employment, effective immediately. Vacate staff quarters within 24 hours. Forfeit severance if found in breach of discretion. A final line, smaller than the rest, carried the sharpest point. Continued relationship with the employer's son shall be considered cause for legal action. My mouth tasted like pennies. The room tipped by a spoon's width. I folded the letter once, twice, until the paper made a quiet sound that felt like a spine. When I looked up, Mrs. Kent could not quite meet my eyes. She had a string around her wrist that I had never noticed before, red and thin. She lifted the folder to hide her face and failed. Adrian spoke first. His voice did not shout. It landed like a plank laid across a flood. "If she goes, I go." His father's smile belonged to a photograph of a different man. "Go then," he said, as if the word cost him nothing. "Bring your keys." Mrs. Vale's pearls did not move, but I saw her throat catch. Her first instinct was to defend the house, to protect what she had built. Her second was a smaller thing with warmer hands. I watched both fight behind her eyes. I prayed for the smaller one to win. We packed the way humble people pack when they already know the shape of leaving. My apron, my 3 dresses, the good shoes wrapped in a kitchen towel, the tiny tin of jasmine salve my mother sends every winter. The bedspread lay smooth with its faded violets. I folded it too, because sometimes a pattern holds you together better than courage. Down the hall, The cook murmured that she had overbaked on purpose and pressed a loaf into my arms, still warm, smelling like a door left ajar on a kind house. The houseman slipped a roll of tape and a cardboard box into our doorway and pretended to ask for it back. The night guard leaned against the jamb and kept his eyes on the corridor. "Safe to go now," he breathed. Small kindness moved like a river underneath the cruelty that strutted on top. It held me up when my legs remembered they were tired. We carried the boxes past the scullery sink where I had cried into dishwater more than once. The lemon tree outside shook in a gust and dropped another fruit. I put it in my pocket with the first one. Proof that sweet things still fall. Proof that I would not come up empty-handed. At the gate, the guard's radio crackled with the polite gossip of danger. Outside, the world had already begun to arrange its curiosity. 2 cars idled. A neighbor's curtain twitched. Someone raised a phone and then lowered it, ashamed, or maybe just late to their better self. Adrian set the boxes in the gardener's trunk, closed the lid, and looked back at his home the way you look at a childhood photo and realize you have outgrown the frame. His father watched from the portico, a silhouette cut from black glass. His mother stood 2 steps behind, fingers pressed white around a rail, the pearls still and yet somehow louder than anyone's breath. We passed under the iron arch and the air changed temperature. The city's smell reached me fully again. Fried dough, damp earth, a whisper of rain that had not decided. I exhaled and felt the morning I used to know return to my lungs. We did not have a plan beyond motion. The gardener's car rattled in a way that soothed me, honest sounds instead of quiet designed to hide secrets. Adrian drove to the old bakery on Soul Street where the owner keeps a small room above the ovens for cousins and strays. The baker's wife took one look at my face and my ring and made us tea without questions. Steam curled like a blessing that did not need a priest. In the tiny room, the mattress dipped toward the wall and the window stuck on the left corner. I loved it immediately. The air tasted like sugar and effort. We stacked the boxes in a tower of modest hope. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and let his shoulders finally confess how much they had been carrying. I touched his hair, gently, the way you learn with a tired bird. He put his hand over mine and held it there, as if telling his pulse to match mine. For a few breaths, there were no mansions, no letters, no blue seals. There was a cup of tea cooling on the sill and a lemon in my pocket, and a man who had chosen a smaller room with me inside it. The world, of course, did not pause. By late afternoon, the bakery bell chimed far too often. People bought buns they did not want and left with sweeter gossip on their tongues. A delivery boy brought a paper folded to the city page. The headline used my job title like a bruise. He did not read it out loud. He slipped the paper under the sugar tongs and gave me a look that said I am sorry in a language children know. My phone buzzed with a voice note from my mother. The network made her sound farther than she is. I could hear birds and late sun. She asked if I was eating, if I had put oil on my knees, if the city was still pretending it does not need small hands to stay clean. I pressed the phone to my ear and answered softly. I told her I was safe and that my name had found a chair to sit on. Evening pushed its blue thumb against the window. Adrian went downstairs to help the baker carry flour sacks, his jacket off, sleeves rolled. The sight did something good to the ache under my ribs. I washed the 2 cups, wiped the sill, and set my folded dresses in the drawer that stuck. Small order, small peace. Then the bakery bell rang once. Not the way customers ring, but the way news rings when it does not plan to be kind. Voices rose and then hushed. The stair creaked. I felt it in my shin, the way a house tells you a visitor is heavier than sugar and lighter than forgiveness. She appeared in the doorway, not pearls this time, not iron either. Mrs. Vale held a covered pot, both hands under it, heat clouding the air above the lid. Her scarf was the color of wet stone. Her eyes were not cold. They were tired and fighting. I brought soup, she said, and the words landed in the room like a chair being pulled out from a table you are not sure you are invited to. She set the pot on the crate we were using as a table. Her fingers shook once, then stilled. She looked at the bed, the boxes, the lemon on the sill, the violet bedspread folded tight. Her mouth softened and then remembered itself. "There is a dinner tonight," she said. "Board members, old friends, people who sign checks and build cages. Your marriage will be carved on that table whether you sit at it or not. Come." Let them look at the person, not the rumor. Wear what you would wear if nobody had ever called you small. The street below bloomed with the sound of the evening rush. Motorbikes laughed. A child sang the same line wrong 3 times and then right the 4th. The pot between us breathed steam that smelled like chicken and ginger and a memory I could not place. Mrs. Vale met my eyes and did not blink. I saw the woman under the winter coat at last, the one who clapped alone in a school gym, the one who learned strength by lifting silence. She did not say please. She did not say prove yourself. She only stood, as if a bridge had started to build itself between us and did not want to lose momentum. I looked at the bedspread, at the ring, at my hands. I looked at the door that led to a table where knives would be polite and wicked at the same time. And then the bakery bell rang again downstairs, sharper now, followed by a voice I knew too well, smooth with money and microphone. A camera hum rose like an insect that had found sugar. Adrian took the stairs 2 at a time. He looked from his mother to me, then to the shadow moving on the wall from the street lamp outside. We were not going to be given the mercy of a quiet choice. The camera found our doorway before mercy did. A red light blinked like a small, rude heartbeat. The reporter's voice was warm the way velvet is warm in winter, nice to touch until you realize it hides a wooden frame. Behind her, a boy I recognized from the next block stood on his toes to see above the grown-ups, flour on his cheek like a thumbprint from the day. Adrian stepped between the lens and my small room without raising his hands. He did not say a single brave sentence. He just became a wall. Mrs. Vale put the lid back on the soup and faced the street, pearls left at home, scarf pulled close. The baker's wife came up the stairs with a shawl that smelled like clean sun and said, "Here, put this on, darling," in the tone women use when they refuse to let a stranger write your weather. The reporter started questions that sounded like statements. Love story. Class lines. Reckless. Maid. She said my job title like it was a stain. I felt the heat rise in my face and I let it pass through. Heat is not always rage. Often it is the body remembering it belongs to itself. Mrs. Vale spoke first. "Dinner in 1 hour. My son and his wife need the stairs clear." Her voice did not plead. It organized. The cameraman lowered his rig because some voices teach even machines to respect doors. In the minute that followed, kindness moved quickly. The baker's wife pinned the shawl so it would not slip. She pulled a simple black dress from a donation bag and whispered it will fit if we breathe together. We did, and it did. I smoothed the fabric with my palms and felt it steady against my skin as if it had been waiting its whole life to meet me. I tucked the lemon from my pocket into my small bag the way a sailor pockets a stone from shore. The scent on my fingers woke something brave. Adrian stood at the sink and washed his hands longer than necessary. When he dried them, he touched the edge of my sleeve, not to claim me, only to check that the thread would hold. We walked down the narrow stairs, our steps finding the same rhythm. The bell rang again and again, the shop below busy with buns and opinions. People made way because the baker's wife said make way, and sometimes the only credential that matters is a person known for kindness raising her chin. The ride back to the big house tasted like mint and flour. We sat close without pressing. Outside, the city turned its lights on one by one, like eyes learning how to be gentle. I watched the windows flicker and counted my breaths the way I do when sleep will not come. One for the girl who irons shirts for meetings she will never see. One for the security guard who sips soup slowly, like a prayer with no words. One for my mother, oiling her knees and humming to the kettle. At the gate, the guards straightened. One of them was the same man from Mornings. He saw my hands on my bag and chewed the inside of his cheek to keep his mouth from misbehaving into a smile. He led us in the way a friend opens their vinyl umbrella wider without making it a ceremony. The house had put on its crown. Chandeliers hummed like bees who knew their queen. The hall smelled of lilies and ambition. A string quartet played a tune that sounded expensive and lonely. We stepped into a room full of glass and opinions. Conversations flickered and then cooled. Faces rearranged themselves into polite masks. You can hear the change when it happens. It sounds like knives deciding to sit down. A place card waited at the long table. Ronnie Solis, it said. Letters steady, not ornamental. The chair beside it had a cushion that did not sag. I stood for a second longer than was graceful, to be sure I was not about to sit where a trick had been laid. Nothing snapped. I sat. The cushion exhaled and accepted me. Mr. Vale lifted his glass and made a toast about fresh starts that was actually about his talent for steering storms. The board members nodded like metronomes. A man with a napkin folded into a fat triangle leaned toward his wife and said the word "maid" under his breath as if hiding it made it harmless. His wife's bracelet clicked, slow and irritated. Service began. A young footman I did not know fizzed with nervousness and poured too quickly. The wine caught the light and leaped. A thin line of red ran toward my wrist. I moved the way people who handle hot pans move, small and precise. The drop caught my shawl and died there. The footman swallowed a sound and went gray at the edges. "It is only cloth," I said, low, to his ear, not to the room. He blinked twice, steadied, and carried on. Across the table, one woman watched the tiny rescue and lifted her water to her mouth with something like respect. Mrs. Vale sat 3 chairs down, where a hostess chooses to listen properly. She wore no jewels. She kept her hands near the table, fingers open, a mother publicly practicing something she should have been allowed to learn in private. Her eyes met mine once, and in that small crossing I felt a rope thrown from one shore to another, nothing dramatic, just enough to carry a note. There are different ways to be cut. Some knives are words with teeth. Some are invitations with hidden hooks. A director at the far end smiled at me and told a story about a village singer who married rich and could not find the right fork. People laughed in the tidy way they do when they need to signal belonging. I didn't laugh. I spread butter on bread like a person who has worked with her hands and knows her own wrists. The butter softened. The moment did not. On my left, an older woman who wore her hair like a crown asked about the bakery upstairs room. Her voice was not unkind. It simply wanted to know if the bed springs sang. Yes, I said. Like crickets. Her mouth surprised itself into a smile. Plates arrived and left. Choices were made and unmade in the low theater of wealth. Under the table, my foot tapped once and stopped. The lemon in my bag made the room smell manageable, like a kitchen at 7 in the evening when the last pot has been washed and the window is open to let the day out. Halfway through, a tall man with a silver tie ringed his glass for quiet. He was the kind of person people turn toward without being told to. He stood, his napkin falling like surrender he would never mean. He looked straight at me and then he told a story about old families, about standards, about the price of doors. His words were warm and heavy. He was not cruel. He was exact. He ended with a sentence that placed my name gently in his mouth and tried to set it down on a smaller plate than it needed. The room waited for my silence to confirm his measure. I could feel Adrian ready himself to lift his voice, the way you see a swimmer track a wave. I laid my hand on the table, palm open, not to stop him, only to tell him I owned my breath. He put his glass down and let me have the air. I reached for my water. I let the cold climb into my palm. The quartet paused as if tuned to my ribs. The footman stood very still by the far door. The night guard, called in to help, hovered by the arch, and watched the room the way a good man watches a bridge in a storm. I lifted my eyes to the speaker with the silver tie. And just as I opened my mouth to offer my small, clean truth, a voice from the entryway cut through the crystal hush, clear as a bell that did not apologize for ringing. The voice from the entryway belonged to the night guard, cap in hand, chest rising like he had carried the whole hallway in his lungs. The quartet lost a note and then found its place. He did not step over the threshold. He stood where servants learned to pause, and still his words reached every plate. "She brings soup to the night shift," he said. When the storm broke the power last winter, she held a flashlight and counted every staff member by name. He swallowed. "That is all." The room changed by a teaspoon. Not enough to save, enough to make honesty visible. The man with the silver tie smiled the way men smile when their story meets sand. Adrian's hand found the table, steady, not clenched. Mrs. Vale closed her eyes for the length of one breath and opened them again with something softer inside. I lifted my water and drank because my mouth had gone dry. The lemon in my bag released its clean scent. I set the glass down and spoke with a small voice that has kept me alive in kitchens, in buses, in rooms that were not mine. I said I am learning to be brave. I said I know how to work. I said kindness is a rule I refuse to retire, even when it is expensive. The silver tie man nodded as if I had just read the weather and not the climate. He glanced at Mr. Vale, permission tucked in the tilt of his chin. Mr. Vale tapped his glass twice. A footman appeared with a folder the color of snow that fell only in magazines. Mr. Vale slid the folder toward me. Inside lay a contract that smelled like ink and winter. The first page was smooth with the calm of expensive decisions. Relocation to the East Villa. Limited appearances until the board resets sentiment. A stipend sized more like hush than care. The last page carried a line that made my ribs press against the edge of my dress. No children until further notice. The room waited the way a room waits when it wants to watch you choose between oxygen and manners. Adrian read faster than I could. His jaw whitened. He did not reach for me. He kept both hands in view, palms open, as if reminding the table he had learned how to ask instead of take. Mrs. Vale did not move, but one pearl earring swung once, slow as a clock. The night guard faded back into the doorway and kept watch without becoming a statue. The footman with a shaky paw stood near a pillar, eyes fixed on the silver tie man as though memorizing how a smile can cut. I ran my fingertip down the page and heard my mother's voice from the village line where the signal stutters. Eat first. Decide after. I pulled the bread plate closer, tore a piece small enough to earn my hunger, and held it in my mouth until it remembered it could soften. The table thought it was stalling. It was prayer. Adrian's father folded his hands. "This is not punishment," he said, smooth as a polished banister. "This is stewardship. You two have a spark." Sparks burn down houses without men who understand structure. Somewhere down the table, a woman cleared her throat the way you do when a story tastes like ash. The older lady with hair like a crown traced a circle on her napkin and looked at me with cloudy eyes that had learned too much. The baker's wife had once told me that a room full of rich people is still only made of human breath. I felt those breaths now, warm and cool, some kind, some not, all of them waiting. I turned to Adrian. His face carried a declaration and an ache. He spoke to the room instead. "I love my wife," he said, not loud, not small. "We will not sign a paper that treats a future child like a market dip." The silver tie man did not frown. He folded his napkin into a new shape, crisp edges, and set it down without looking. Then he lifted a hand and a second folder appeared, thinner, edged in gray. This one used gentle words to promise sharp things. A transition period. A communications plan. An advisory seat for Adrian with fewer votes. The East Villa again, which I could taste in my mouth like a lemon that had lost its brightness. Mrs. Vale finally spoke. Her voice had lost its winter. She said, "There is a different plan." Her hand rested flat on the table as if calming a nervous animal. She listed it like a grocery note. Adrian keeps his seat. The rumor machine is dismantled in public. The staff gets a wage review by morning. My daughter-in-law chooses whether any camera sees her face this month. The silver tie man laughed once, softly. "The board will never agree," he said, and his mouth made the shape of a door closing on a finger that wasn't his. The night guard shifted his weight like he had remembered he could grow taller by an inch. The footman lifted the empty water jug and set it down with deliberate care, as if teaching his hands the word no. A string on a cello hummed in the quartet and steadied. I picked up the pen that lay ghost quiet by the contract because sometimes to win you first have to prove you understand the shape of what you are refusing. The pen felt heavy, a metal bird. At the head of the table, Mr. Vale tilted his chin. There it was, the old lesson, the one that says manners will save you as long as you swallow your own name. I signed my name on the margin where ink means nothing, a Ronnie that looked like a promise to myself. Then I set the pen down and folded the contract closed with my fingertips so gently even my mother would not call it rude. The lights over the table brightened by a whisper. I heard the soft intake of breath that rooms make when someone refuses a script. Adrian let out air like a tire finally patched. The man with the silver tie still smiled, but it had the sheen of a dish that sat too long under heat. Then the house made a sound I had never heard from it, a long metal sigh from the front hall. The butler rushed in with his dignity on. A city car had arrived with a small seal on its door, not blue, not gold, the kind that means paper with teeth. A messenger in a raincoat stood under the chandelier with a folder hugged close, as if the document could feel the chill. "Delivery for Mrs. Vale," he said, voice careful. He looked at me for the length of half a heartbeat, as if a child at home had told him my name. The room leaned. The messenger stepped forward. The chandelier chimed its own tiny bells in the draft. And as the seal on the new folder caught the light, something old in me recognized the shape of trouble before my eyes could read it. The folder was the color of storm water. The messenger's hands were chapped, the kind of skin that belongs to people who stand at doors all day and carry other people's weather. He passed the document to Mrs. Vale and stepped back as if heat might rise from ink. Her eyes moved once across the page, and something in her shoulders sank an inch. She slid the folder to the end of the table where the light was kinder. I could smell paper, cold and sharp, like rain on iron. It was an old clause, written before Adrian grew tall enough to see over the railings of this life. The family trust required the spouse of the heir to be approved by a panel of trustees within 30 days. Marry without their blessing and the trust freezes the votes. Projects pause. Wages get reviewed downward. Scholarships stall. The letter used clean words to promise hunger in other homes. The man with the silver tie smiled like he had been expecting the storm and had already rolled up his cuffs. "We can still agree to the East Villa," he said, gentle as bleach. "We can keep the market calm while the panel does its work." My throat tightened. The panel was not a room made of law. It was made of taste. It was a mirror with a password I had never learned. Mr. Vale folded his hands and performed regret with an expert's grace. "We do not make these rules," he said. "We uphold them for the good of the name." Across the table, the night guard shifted his weight like a man preparing to sleep on a hard chair. The footman with a shaky paw fixed a slightly crooked knife so it would not shame him later. Small order in the face of large disorder. I took courage from both. Adrian turned to his mother. "What do you want?" he asked, quiet. It was not defiance. It was a son asking a woman who had learned to live inside storms how to choose a door. Her eyes found mine and held. I saw the steel of all her winters and the thaw of one beginning. "I want our house to stop teaching our children that love must pass a test to be allowed to set the table," she said. Then she did a surprising thing. She looked at me and continued as if I were the only person in the room. The panel meets at 9. You can refuse to go and we will fight in court for months while wages hang in air. Or you can come stand in your name and let them see a person instead of a rumor. Choose what lets you sleep. The room waited for me to be small. The lemon in my bag breathed its clean note. Sleep matters, my mother says, more than pride, more than victory. Sleep is how the heart files its papers. I stood without scraping the chair. I said I would go. Not to be approved, but to be counted. I said if they asked me to shrink, I would bring the names whose checks would bounce while they took their time. The baker's niece. The guard's youngest. The girl at the gate who saves coins for night classes. I spoke like a woman building a narrow bridge in rain. The silver tie man raised the corner of his napkin in a salute that did not feel kind. Then he leaned back, as if the evening had returned to its regular program. It had not. We left the table without ceremony. Mrs. Vale pressed the storm-colored folder to her chest as if it were a cold child. The night guard returned to the door he knew best. The footman found the courage to smile at me with his eyes, quick and secret, and then looked away so the room would not tax him for it. Outside, the air had the clean bite of a city that has decided to stop being polite. The drive glistened. The old lemon tree gave up another fruit with a soft thud. I pocketed it out of habit and hope. In the car, Adrian reached for my hand and did not try to steer it. We drove in quiet that felt like two people sharpening one blade together. The night in the bakery room was short and honest. I ironed the black dress by the glow of the small lamp, the iron hissing like a tired animal that still means to work. I set the soup on the sill to cool and ate with thank you in my mouth. Sleep came like a visitor who knows the back door and does not knock. Dawn broke thin and blue. We walked to the stop where buses kneel for people with bags of bread. The same boy from the flowers waved, shy at the edges, and pressed a slightly bruised daisy into my palm. For luck, he said. His grin was the first vote I needed. The trust hall was all glass and hush, a building that wants to look humble while it counts crowns. Inside, the air smelled like polished wood and old decisions. A receptionist with quiet hands pinned visitor badges to our coats. Mrs. Vale arrived carrying a thermos and a paper cup for me, steam lifting as if prayer had chosen a new outfit. Members of the panel drifted in with nods that meant different things. One woman wore a plain suit and shoes for walking. She met my eyes and did not flinch. Another adjusted his cuff where a monogram winked. He did not look at me at all. The silver tie man took a seat near the dais and placed his phone face down with a small, smug care. A clock ticked with a soft confidence I envied. The doors to the chamber yawned open a minute early, as if time had decided to be kind. I folded the daisy into my bag beside the lemon. I touched the ring that lay warm against my finger. Adrian stood a half step behind me and slightly to the side, a posture that says I am here and I will not cover your name. We walked forward on carpet that swallowed sound. The room beyond held a long table, a row of chairs, and a window that faced east so the first light would wash whoever stood to speak. I could feel my voice preparing itself, not to impress, just to carry the truth as far as breath would allow. The panel chair cleared his throat. The silver tie man smiled without heat. The woman in walking shoes set a pen on paper and waited like a student who still loves to learn. And from the back row, where visitors sit when they cannot afford the front, a camera light blinked awake, small as a pin, steady as a pulse, ready to turn a life into a segment if it could. The tiny camera light blinked like a restless thought. My throat dried, then found water in the steam rising from the cup Mrs. Vale pressed into my hand. Ginger, sugar, steady. I nodded my thanks. She moved to the back row, near the door, where mothers learn to keep watch without shadowing the child. The panel chair adjusted his glasses. The woman in walking shoes uncapped her pen. The silver tie man sat angled so the window poured light over his shoulder, not his face. He lifted his phone a finger's width. The screen stayed dark. Polite power. I felt the daisy's stem between my fingers. I tucked it beside the lemon in my bag and stepped to the mark on the carpet where voices are measured against old rules. "Thank you for letting me stand," I said. My voice sounded like early morning in a kitchen, soft but awake. I told them my name again, because names need air. I said I came from a village where people still bring chairs out to the road after dusk to share the news that never makes a paper. I said I know how to work and to rest, to wash a floor without erasing my reflection, to hold soup steady for a guard who cannot leave his post. The woman in walking shoes wrote 3 words and underlined 1. The chair leaned back as if listening required breath. The silver tie man offered a polite half-smile that could mean anything, which is a kind of no. I did not beg them for approval. I brought a list. The baker's niece who needs the bus fare to her course. The footman with the shaky paw who stays late to polish the glass so it does not shame him. The gardener's wife and the small cough that came back with the rain. The night guard's twins, who still bring homework to his stool because they like the way the screen reflects in their father's eyes. This house feeds many, I said. If you freeze the trusts to punish a marriage, you will chill more rooms than mine. Behind me, a chair creaked. Adrian shifted his weight to my rhythm, not to correct it. The ginger in my mouth had cooled to sweetness. I rested my palm on the folder with the old claws and let my hand be heavy enough to make the paper remember it was only paper. The silver tie man finally spoke. His voice was freshly ironed. He said, "We are not cruel." He said reputations are bridges and bridges must be tested. He asked whether I understood the compromise on offer. The East Villa. A transition period. I nodded so he would not mistake my calm for confusion. Then I said I understand hunger better than compromise. I smiled small and honest. He did not. The woman in walking shoes lifted her head. "What do you want, Ronnie?" she asked. Warm but clean. She had given back my name with no perfume on it. It made the room feel possible. "I want to be allowed to build a life without shrinking," I said. "I want the staff paid before the chandelier bulbs. I want to sing at the next staff wedding without anyone counting the forks." My voice shook once, then held. "I will not be the reason a scholarship pauses or a pantry empties. If you need a test of our name, test how fast we choose kindness when it costs." From the back row came a soft scrape, shoes finding courage. The night guard stood at the aisle, cap in hand, his badge number glinting like a tiny lighthouse. He did not speak. He only nodded in the direction of my shoulders and sat again. The footman beside him copied the nod with his chin. The gesture passed through the row like a quiet game of telephone that traveled on bravery instead of rumor. The chair looked to the window, then to the clock, then down at his papers as if he could find an answer there that had not been written by fear. He said the panel would recess for 10 minutes. He said we should remain seated. He said it in the tone of a man used to being obeyed by carpet and sunlight. 10 minutes is long when a heart is holding the door. I breathed like a person learning to swim. Adrian slid a mint into my palm and said nothing. Mrs. Vale twisted the cap on the thermos until it squeaked, then stopped, then started again, the small music of a woman remembering the rhythm of action. The silver tie man walked to the window and pretended to love the view. His reflection looked back at him with admirable patience. The woman in walking shoes closed her notebook and stared at her hands, the way you do when you are about to choose the kind of courage that will not photograph well. I took the daisy from my bag and set it on the table beside the folder, a small, awkward flag for the country of ordinary people. I placed the lemon next to it, bright as sunrise, a promise that even fallen things keep their usefulness. The receptionist at the door smiled so quickly it almost did not exist. Almost. When the panel returned, the room tightened. I felt it in my ankles. The chair cleared his throat and looked at me first, not at the camera light, not at the silver tie. It mattered. The woman in walking shoes picked up her pen and let it rest on the paper like a bird that has decided to stay. The silver tie man arranged his face into benevolence. Before anyone could speak, the rear door opened. Someone slipped in and stood, hat in both hands, cheeks still red from the street. The flower boy from Soul Street. He lifted his chin and spoke to the room that likes expensive words. She paid full price for a daisy that was going to wilt, he said. Then she asked if I had eaten lunch. I had not. She gave me half her bread. He looked at the clock like he wanted to be sure he had not stolen time. That is it. He backed away, heart on his sleeve, and vanished through the crack he had entered. Silence rearranged the air. It felt less rich and more human. The panel chair's shoulders dropped the smallest amount. He spoke in a voice that had put on work boots. He said the trust will not freeze. He said the wage review would begin today because ours is not the kind of house that teaches its children to starve others for sport. He said there would be no East Villa, no transition plan that hides a person, no clause that treats a child like market weather. He said the board would learn to answer questions without a stage. The silver tie man opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again and found only a sentence about process. It went nowhere. The woman in walking shoes added a line about audits and sunlight. She did not look at me as if I were a symbol. She looked the way people look at a neighbor with a shovel when the rain has started to rise. I felt my knees, finally. I sat. Adrian's hand found mine under the table, palm up, a grounding wire. Mrs. Vale did not clap. She folded her scarf and slipped it into her bag, as if she had put away a winter that would still visit, but less often. The night guard pressed 2 fingers to his cap and blinked 3 times fast. The footman exhaled like a kettle set off the heat. The receptionist breathed out a little laugh that sounded like a first day of spring. When we stepped outside, the city had the color of hope that has learned to be practical. The bakery was opening early for the lunch crowd. The bus sighed like a tired lung choosing to keep going. The lemon in my bag bumped my hip. The daisy flattened a bit, imperfect and honest. I am not naive. There will be dinners that turn into tests. Hours that smell like ink and winter. People who pronounce my job title like a warning. Some bridges will still charge a toll. But small kindness has a stubborn heartbeat. I heard it in the night guard story, in a boy's daisy, in a woman's quiet pen, in a mother's thermos pouring heat into cold rooms. If you are carrying a name that shakes in other people's mouths, may you find a chair where your breath can rest. If you are tired, may your tired be clean. If the rules try to make you small, may your hands keep doing simple, good work until the room remembers what hands are for. Hope does not always arrive with banners. Most days it comes as soup in a paper cup, a coin for a wilted flower, a lemon in a pocket to remind you that sweetness survives the fall. A week later the house sounded different. Not louder, just honest. The hallway clock kept time without hurrying anyone's breath. In the kitchen, wages were posted on a clean sheet the color of morning, and the cook cried softly into a towel she pretended was for steam. The footman with a shaky pour learned the small circle that steadies the wrist, and his smile arrived like a sunrise he had earned. The night guard's twins brought homework again and set it by his stool, pencils tapping a rhythm that felt like future. Adrian showed up to staff briefing with his sleeves rolled, not to pose, to carry chairs, to listen without correcting. He learned where the mop water goes, how the lemon oil lifts fingerprints from a banister, how names sound when said with care. He walked through rooms that had always loved his footsteps and tried, every hour, to deserve the floor. The silver tie man sent 2 polite memos and then stopped writing. Some storms move on when they cannot find air. One afternoon, Mrs. Vale stood with me under the old lemon tree. She held pruning shears the way you hold a book you plan to return. The fruit hung low, heavy and bright, and she laughed once, surprised, when a branch brushed her cheek. Pearls stayed in their box. A scarf kept her hair out of her eyes. She told me about a winter when the pipes burst and she boiled water in a kettle for every bed. She never mentioned the panel. She asked if the soup recipe needed more ginger. We both already knew it did. We took a small sapling to my mother's village a few days later, wrapped in damp burlap like a promise that could travel. The bus rattled kindly. Dust rose like memory. My mother's yard smelled of turmeric and soap and shade. She pressed my face between her hands and murmured my name until it sounded like a song she was finishing. She scolded Adrian for forgetting to drink, then fed him mango with salt and chili until he remembered how to be a son again. We planted the lemon by the fence, where the goats cannot reach and the sun behaves. My mother poured the first ladle of water. The ground took it without fuss. Back at the bakery room, life kept its small vows. The baker's niece started her course with a bus pass tucked inside a plastic sleeve and a grin too big for her face. The boy from Soul Street learned to trim stems and pick flowers that last a day longer. He brought me a daisy that refused to wilt, and I kept it in a jar by the window until it gave up gracefully. Nor from the neighborhood center taught staff how to back up documents and how to say no to rumors before they learned to run. We bought a second kettle. Hope is thirsty work. We did not become legends. We became reliable. Lunch arrived for the night shift on time. The payroll clerk set her alarm 5 minutes early so the numbers would land where they should. A line of shoes dried by the back door on rainy days, all sizes, all stories, leather and rubber and faith. On Sundays I sang in the courtyard for anyone who needed a song, and when my voice caught, the gardener's wife hummed harmony until I found the note again. People still whispered sometimes. In elevators. At markets. On soft chairs built for judgment. The sound passed through me like wind through curtains. I kept sweeping. Adrian kept showing up anywhere there was honest work to do. Mrs. Vale brought a thermos whenever a meeting looked like winter. Mr. Vale learned to say I was wrong and to leave the sentence standing without a decorator's flourish. It was not perfect. It was better. On the day the Night Guard's twins received their scholarship letters, he carried the envelopes like fragile bread and let me open them because my hands were steady. We stood under the service light where moths practice being brave, and we read the words out loud, once for each twin. The letters rustled like wings that had decided to believe in themselves. He sat down very carefully and cried into his cap. I put half a lemon in his palm because smell can keep a man from floating away. At dusk, the windows caught gold and gave it back to the street. I walked the corridor with a bucket that smelled of lemon and clean cloth and future. The mop slipped like a dancer. My palms were a little soft again, my name a little taller in my mouth. Adrian waited by the terrace with a paper bag from the bakery, 2 buns still warm, butter wrapped in newsprint like a precious thing you hand to a friend. We ate with our backs to the city, shoulders touching, not to claim, to anchor. If the world feels heavy where you stand, may the light find you anyway. If your name shakes in other people's mouths, may you keep speaking it softly until it learns to rest. If rules try to make you small, may your hands stay busy with small good work that shifts the weight of a room by a teaspoon a day. Hope is not a parade. Most days it is bread shared on a step, a lemon tree taking root, a door held open long enough for kindness to walk through and stay.